You stand or sit in a perfectly safe environment, completely conscious of the responsibilities accumulating around your life. Your intellect fully comprehends the catastrophic real-world consequences of your current inaction. The project remains unexecuted, the critical phone call is avoided, and your potential is systematically rotting in real time. Pop psychology looks at this profound immobility and aggressively diagnoses it as a moral failure, structural laziness, or a basic lack of ambition. It hands you superficial time management charts, screaming motivational monologues, and rigid productivity frameworks designed to shame your mind into compliance. These external interventions fail with absolute certainty because your paralysis has nothing to do with your character. You are experiencing a profound, localized clinical phenomenon known as Abulia. Abulia is the literal anatomical shutdown of the human will. It is a biological state where your central nervous system retains full processing capability and full muscular capacity. Yet the internal ignition switch responsible for translating a conscious thought into physical motor execution has been completely dismantled by your brain. To comprehend why your will can experience a complete structural collapse, we must track the exact neurological highway responsible for human action initiation. Every conscious decision to move your body toward a long-term goal originates in a highly specialized, deeply buried neural architecture known as the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC. The ACC operates as the brain's internal conflict resolution matrix and executive engine. It evaluates the metabolic energy required to perform a difficult task against the anticipated neurochemical reward upon completion. In a healthy, fully optimized nervous system, the ACC calculates that the effort is worthwhile and fires a clean electrical command down to the basal ganglia, the master gating system that physically releases your voluntary motor systems. However, this entire architectural loop is completely dependent on a steady, precise delivery of neurotransmitters. If the chemical signals feeding the anterior cingulate cortex are compromised by chronic stress or overstimulation, the circuit breaks down. The ACC fires its command, but the gate refuses to open, locking your body in a state of absolute volitional freeze. The primary fuel that powers the anterior cingulate cortex's capacity to initiate action is dopamine, delivered across a specific biological highway known as the meso-cortical pathway. When pop psychology discusses dopamine, it incorrectly trivializes it as a simple molecule of pleasure or digital validation. In reality, dopamine is the fundamental neurochemical currency of physical effort, abstract focus, and evolutionary momentum. It is what makes an organism willing to expend valuable calories to alter its immediate environment. When your nervous system is subjected to chronic, low-grade cortisol exposure from an overactive background network, paired with the unnatural, high-amplitude spikes of modern digital overstimulation, your dopamine synthesis centers enter a state of severe metabolic exhaustion. The baseline drops to zero. This means that when you look at a task requiring effort, the meso-cortical pathway fails to deliver the necessary chemical spark to your ACC. The brain's internal computer calculates that the task is too expensive to initiate, systematically pulling the plug on your drive. Deep within the subcortical structures of the brain lies the basal ganglia, the literal gatekeeper of all voluntary human movement. Under normal conditions, your motor cortex is constantly generating random motor commands, but the basal ganglia acts as a strict physical brake, keeping your body still until a deliberate executive decision is made. When you choose to write, study, or move toward an objective, the anterior cingulate cortex must send a powerful, dopamine-fueled electrical signal to the striatum inside the basal ganglia. This signal explicitly releases the brake, allowing the motor command to travel down your spinal cord and move your limbs. In a state of clinical abulia, this direct pathway is functionally paralyzed. Because your dopamine pathways are desensitized and downregulated, the signal generated by your conscious mind is too weak to clear the elevated threshold of the basal ganglia's brake. You are trapped in an agonizing physical paradox. Your conscious intellect is screaming at your body to move, but your subcortical hardware is actively holding your muscles in a state of permanent arrest. This structural breakdown within the basal ganglia creates a profound psychological phenomenon known to clinical neuroscience as the functional disconnect of intent. You experience this as an intense physical weight radiating through your entire body. Your limbs feel heavy, your posture remains slumped, and staring at a screen or a wall feels like an insurmountable physical challenge. For an individual trapped inside this biological glitch, the separation between the mind and the body becomes an absolute canyon. You look at your hands and realize you possess the physical strength to type or move, yet the actual motor execution centers inside your cerebrum remain completely non-responsive to your conscious will. This mismatch triggers an immediate wave of intense internal guilt and psychological confusion. Because you cannot see the chemical depletion inside your striatum, you conclude that you must be inherently broken or uniquely incapable, failing to realize that your physical immobility is a precise, predictable consequence of an architectural circuit running entirely without fuel. To find the deeper physical origin of this volitional shutdown, we must examine the concept of localized cellular energy allocation. The brain operates on a strict, zero-sum metabolic budget, prioritizing basic survival mechanisms over complex long-term executive planning. When you spend weeks or months trapped in a state of high chronic stress, anxiety, or internal rumination, your survival networks demand a constant supply of glucose and oxygenated blood to the limbic system. Consequently, the anterior cingulate cortex and the prefrontal networks are subjected to chronic metabolic starvation. This creates a severe cortical energy crisis. Tasks requiring focused attention and motor initiation become physically exhausting for the brain to calculate. This is why, after a full day of doing absolutely nothing productive, your body feels completely shattered. Your system has been engaged in a costly internal struggle, burning through its metabolic reserves just to keep you isolated in your comfort zone, destroying the resources required to end the paralysis. When the functional disconnect of intent is left running without intervention, it forces the brain into a highly destructive evolutionary state known as learned helplessness. Every time your conscious mind commands your body to take action, and your compromised basal ganglia refuses to open the motor gate, your subconscious networks log that failure as a critical piece of data. Through the process of negative neuroplasticity, the brain adjusts its internal models of reality to match your lack of execution. It concludes that your conscious intent possesses zero actual control over your physical environment. The neural pathways responsible for tracking agency and self-efficacy begin to undergo structural atrophy. Your survival networks calculate that expending metabolic energy on goals is a completely wasteful biological investment. This identity shift marks a dangerous inflection point. Your brain stops trying to clear the motor gate entirely, locking you into a permanent state of passive, survival-driven stagnation. The ultimate consequence of chronic abulia extends directly into the motor cortex itself, the localized region of the brain responsible for generating the literal electrical patterns of movement. Biology operates on a strict rule of usage. Pathways that fire together survive, while pathways that remain dormant are systematically pruned away. When you spend months avoiding complex, goal-directed tasks, The white matter tracts connecting your prefrontal intentions to your motor cortex begin to lose their structural integrity and insulation. The electrical conductivity of your action circuits degrades. This means that even if you experience a sudden, temporary burst of inspiration or motivation, the signal dissolves before it can successfully cross your degraded pathways. Your motor cortex has become desensitized to your own thoughts. You find yourself unable to hold focus for more than a few minutes before your system forces an internal retreat, showing how behavioral paralysis alters the literal electrical firing patterns of your cerebrum. The primary mistake made by millions of individuals trapped inside volitional paralysis is the comforting illusion of the waiting spark. You tell yourself that you are simply waiting for the right moment, the perfect level of energy, or a sudden revelation of purpose to clear your slate. You look toward the future, assuming that some external event will magically restore your drive and unlock your body. This is a devastating neurochemical delusion. Motivation is not a mystical force that strikes from the outside world. It is a physiological reward that is synthesized only after an action has already been initiated. Expecting a desensitized, dopamine-starved anterior cingulate cortex to generate a spark of desire before you move is equivalent to demanding that an engine run without fuel. By waiting for the feeling of willingness to arrive before you take the first step, you are actively obeying the exact biological downregulation that is keeping you paralyzed, ensuring that your state of immobility will continue to compound indefinitely. We arrive at the final, sobering station of the Abulia glitch, the threshold of absolute systemic failure. At this stage, your executive control networks have been entirely stripped of their operational authority. Your dopamine pathways are depleted, your basal ganglia brake is hard-locked, your motor circuits are desensitized, and your body is physically exhausted by a constant state of low-grade endocrine alarm. You have built a physical and mental lifestyle that is completely optimized to protect your ego from the friction of execution. You are safe from the immediate fear of failure, but you have traded your human agency for an automated, low-grade survival loop that works entirely against your aspirations. You look at your life and feel a profound sense of existential flatness and absolute alienation from your own potential. You have allowed your survival networks to optimize your biology for complete stagnation, leaving you a passive observer trapped inside a physical shell that refuses to obey your commands. When an individual reaches this absolute floor of volitional paralysis, pop psychology universally urges them to engage in willpower overdrive. It demands that you simply try harder, dig deeper, and force your body through sheer mental intensity. This recommendation completely fails to comprehend the raw underlying physics of a compromised brain. You cannot use willpower to fix a system that has literally lost the neurochemical capacity to process willpower. Forcing a desensitized, waste-choked anterior cingulate cortex to execute complex, long-term plans only accelerates the process of cellular exhaustion, deepening the chemical deficit, and ensuring that your next behavioral collapse will be even more severe. To break an interlocked biological glitch, you must entirely abandon the emotional paradigms of self-help and approach your central nervous system with the cold, clinical precision of an engineer, using physiological friction to bypass your broken intentional networks entirely. Reclamation of your internal operating system does not begin with an intense burst of grand ambition or a mindset shift. It begins with the forced execution of micromotor ignition. To bypass a hard-locked basal ganglia gate, you must reduce the metabolic cost of your task until it registers as 0 to your amygdala. You do not attempt to write the paper, build the business, or organize your life. You force your body to execute a single low-stakes physical movement, such as moving your hand to open a blank document or standing up for exactly 60 seconds. This microaction requires an infinitesimally small drop of dopamine, allowing the weak signal from your ACC to successfully clear the gate. When physical movement occurs, the motor cortex fires, releasing a microscopic immediate burst of baseline dopamine. This microdose fixes your receptor sensitivity in real time, lowering the threshold for the next movement. You are not trying to feel good. You are using the cold data of physical action to mechanically jumpstart a broken circuit from the bottom up.